And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The big news today, Michael Flynn off the hook, or so it seems. Trump's first national security advisor, who twice admitted that he was guilty, twice went into court and said, yep, I did it, I'm guilty. Then did an about-face. Attorney General Barr in the Department of Justice said, we're not interested in pursuing it. And thus the fun and hijinks begin, as today you had an appeals court force their will on the lower court who hadn't been able to finish their job. Now, look, I understand if the appeal court, once it's finished, looked at it and said, you know what, you've done your job, you've done your due diligence, it's all gone the way it's supposed to go, and now we've decided, that's one thing. But to completely do this about face on someone who twice walked into court and said, yep, I'm guilty, got a problem with. This is one of those weird kind of moments where you got a guy who twice, like I said, walked in, pled guilty, now off scot-free. And even worse today was because, this is what tin pot dictators do. This is the kind of stuff that you expect in authoritarian regimes, where the court system is at the behest of the dear leader. And this is, one of these, it's not about Michael Flynn. It's about the fact that Trump and his acolytes and his supporters all say, the whole Russia thing was a hoax. So everything associated with it was all a setup. And Flynn was at the heart of this. Flynn broke laws. There's no question about that. And he's going to walk away on it. And look, there are people who just because it's team sport are okay with it. Now, I saw a tweet coming out from Carrie Kupik. She's a spokesperson for the Attorney General's office for Attorney General Barr. She's also the Director of Communications and Public Affairs at the Department of Justice. On the Department of Justice's official Twitter account, she tweeted out today, win in General Flynn's case. D.C. Circuit has ruled 2-1, instructing Judge Sullivan to grant DOJ's motion to dismiss the case, followed by 4 American flags. Now, I would expect that from, some media commentator or, some Trump supporter, but the official spokesperson for the Department of Justice out there gloating in public that they were able to usurp the law and bend it in their favor right in front of us should be fairly scary. Should be an awakening for all of us. And as I saw this happen, I looked at it and I said, had Obama tried any of this stuff, the armed insurrection would have already happened. But this administration, as I said from the beginning, the kleptocracy, the crime syndicate, it's who they are. And to highlight that today, the story came out over at Fox News. And yes, I am going to cite a Fox News story who said that the co-founder of Students for Trump pled guilty yesterday to scamming customers and businesses out of about $46,000. Evidently, this, 23-year-old kid went online, posed as an attorney, gave legal advice, claimed he had 15 years of experience. And I said, look, I said he went to New York University's law school, all kinds of stuff. And I'm of the mindset that, they shouldn't have really bothered because this is who the Trump people are. And maybe Trump should pardon him because, this is the up and coming Republican Party right here, full of graft and full of schemes. Now, obviously on Twitter, I was rebuked. A lot of people saying that they should throw him away and he should get the maximum 20-year sentence that he faces. He'll be sentenced on November 18th. But I guess part of the deal is he's going to pay all the money back, all $46,654, and won't appeal any sentence that's less than 21 months. So he's probably going to get 21 months in jail. He's a younger kid. And we'll see what crimes he commits down the road. So there is that. The other big news today, and there is big news, so put your listening ears on. According to the Associated Press, yesterday, the U.S. saw its third highest number of new coronavirus cases since the pandemic began, at over 34,700 nationwide. Today, we have achieved number one. And this, I guess, is what winning looks like. We have topped 36,000 cases, which is the most new cases in a single day since the beginning of the pandemic. So for all the people who are out there going, oh, it's over, there's nothing to worry about, it's green, I live in a green zone. For all of you, it ain't over. And this was predicted. We knew this was coming. We'd been saying this on the program for all those people who say, well, I'm not worrying about it. I'm going to go travel down south because they're not worrying about it. Well, guess what? This is what we ended up with. And guess where the places being hit by it are? Those places down south. And what is our super spreader in chief doing about it? Well, holding rallies, obviously. And now we find out that the White House evidently is planning to end funding for coronavirus testing sites in several states, Pennsylvania being one of them. According to reports by CNN, Talking Points Memo, and Forbes, they point out that the White House is planning to end federal funding for 13 of these coronavirus testing sites in Illinois, New Jersey, Colorado, and Pennsylvania. So yeah, at a time when and at a time when things are going up, we're going to take it away. Also, Texas. I forgot to mention that Texas is going to get hit the hardest because they're taking 7 of the sites away supposedly there. Now, this is important to remember because you go back to April, where Trump didn't want to spend the money to begin with, was talking about cutting funding back then. In fact, one of the testing sites here in Pennsylvania, there was a huge to-do about near Philadelphia. In fact, we were going to have, one of the county commissioners on the day it was supposed to end, but fortunately, through pressure and through, our governor, pushing, they were able to restore the funding and keep that site open. Now back on the chopping block, I guess is where we are. And this is, again, one of those moments where you look at the leadership that's coming out of this administration, or lack thereof, and question what exactly is it that they're doing. Now, you look at Trump's tweet, a tweet that's going to live on long after he's out of the Oval Office, and I'm hoping that's January 20th of next year. He tweeted out, cases are going up in the U.S. because we are testing far more than any other country and ever expanding. With smaller testing, we would show fewer cases. And here's the thing, he's not wrong. I want to throw out the Big Lebowski quote. You're not wrong, Walter. You're just a blank hole. He's not wrong here. If we didn't test, there'd be no new cases. Now, that doesn't mean we wouldn't have sick people. And this is the part that gets me. We would still have sick people. The problem I have is as much testing as Trump says we're doing, we're still not doing enough. Nowhere near enough. And we haven't even allocated the money that we had set aside. We haven't used the money that we allocated to do the testing with as of yet. In fact, you've got Senate Democrats who are saying that nearly $14 billion has been left undistributed for testing and tracing. Patty Murray, senator from Washington State, she is alleging that the Department of Health and Human Services has spent just $10.8 million of the $2 billion that was set aside for free testing for the uninsured. So they set aside $2 billion. They've spent about $10 million, which is literally a drop in the proverbial bucket. Now, this afternoon, after reading all of the things I just pointed out to you, that the White House they've been saying that we're doing too much testing. In April, they didn't want to extend it. They said we're going to do away with it. Now you get the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Admiral Brett Goyer, who has now come out with an even better statement of, we're not withdrawing support. We're providing federal support in a different way. And, my first response is, what the hell does that mean? And the different way is, we're just not doing it. And this is one of those moments where you go, this is when you absolutely need an actual leader. And I saw John Bolton's, a snippet of John Bolton on CNN. Bolton, obviously the former White House National Security Advisor. Interesting day for national security advisors. Flynn, who just got the luck of his life by pleading guilty twice and getting off the hook. And now Bolton, who, if Trump is reelected, will be on the hot seat and probably going to jail. He said, when asked about Trump's handling of the coronavirus, Bolton said, and I'm just going to read his statement, I think there's an empty chair in the Oval Office because the president didn't want to hear bad news about Xi Jinping, his friend. He didn't want to hear bad news about the cover-up of the virus in China or the potential effect on China's trade deal that he wants so much. And he didn't want to hear about the potential impact of a pandemic on the American economy and its effect on his reelection. Bolton says turning a blind eye to all of these early signs, I think, hampered the country's ability to deal with this and continues to do so. Bolton was then asked, do you have any confidence in Trump's handling of this? He said, I do not. He says, I'm afraid that the erratic nature of the policies that they've evolved since January, when experts were really beginning to sense that this problem might be out there, that characterized our response throughout. He says, I'm worried that it continues to be the pattern that the president follows. It's not part of a comprehensive strategy. I think in a country the size of the United States, state and local authorities should have a big role. But at the federal level, the response has not been consistent. Now, just in the little thing that I laid out, we're pulling the testing sites. We're doing it a different way. If we Trump statements, if we just did less testing, we'd have less coronavirus. Where do you believe? And this is that moment where just stop what I've thrown out at you and think about, what do you believe? Do you believe that this guy, who is all over the map, scattershot from the beginning, with no leadership quality on this issue whatsoever, do you really think he wants to find out who's sick and help them get the care that they need? Hell no, it's bad for his reelection. And even John freaking Bolton is saying this. Basically everything Bolton said in this statement, I've said 1,000 times. Nothing new here. But the difference is John Bolton's saying it, who was a Trump guy and a Republican loyalist. So the question is when will the rest of the Republican Party wake up? Now, Bolton, in the defense of Trump against Bolton, Bolton's probably going to jail. If Trump is reelected, the good thing of Trump being reelected, in my view, would be Bolton going to jail. The bad thing is the end of democracy, the end of workers' rights, the end of clean water, clean air, that stuff. The end of democracy, the end of life as we know it. But at least John Bolton would go to jail. Now, you look at the leadership question. You've got to, as Bolton said, the federal response hasn't been consistent. It's been a nightmare. You look at Texas, who was one of the first states saying, we're reopening. You had a lieutenant governor saying, well, we need to reopen and let those old people die because we need an economy. Well, the Texas governor today has come out and said that, there's a massive outbreak across the state of Texas, and they're actually going to start looking at greater restrictions. And this is where every one of those people in office should be thrown out on their ear, because Texas didn't really have a problem until they had a problem. Had they just stayed the course and not been complete and total morons, they wouldn't have this problem. All through the South, had they just used a little sense, had they just not been completely ignorant, they wouldn't be going through this. Because we were over the hump, man. We were over the hump. And now they're going to screw up the rest of us which is why you saw today Governor Cuomo of New York, Governor Lamont of Connecticut, and Governor Murphy of New Jersey announced that people coming from one of 9 states, Florida, Texas, Arizona, think of those, if they come to New York, Connecticut, or New Jersey, they're going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Voluntarily, they're going to have to come in, they're going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks. If they don't, if they violate the quarantine orders, first fine $2,000, second fine $5,000, and if you cause any harm to anyone, up to a $10,000 fine. They're taking this seriously. You look at Washington State, who is seeing a spike as well. They're running out of hospital beds in one county. You've got Washington Governor Jay Inslee now saying that they're going to have to be much more aggressive in making people wear masks in public and in buildings. And they're actually looking to charge people with misdemeanor crimes. It's gotten to the point that we're not capable of being adults, that we now have to make it criminal. Which, again, is something I said from the start. Because the only way that Americans are going to listen is if you smack them with a fine. And sadly, we're not smart enough. And this is what my daughter and I were talking about today. We haven't trained critical thinking adults in how to keep themselves safe. It's really quite remarkable. And yet every day you run into somebody who, by not wearing a mask in a public setting, in a store, shouting at workers, basically telling everybody they don't care about you or anybody else because they don't care about themselves. Interesting moments. Lots to get to today. Interesting day in New York's primary yesterday. When we come back, going to talk about that a little bit. Also get some thoughts on the upcoming election. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people.
More American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day spontaneous protest strikes began against the new Taft-Hartley Act. 250,000 soft coal miners in Pennsylvania walked out of the pits. 102,000 shipyard workers of the CIO's Industrial Union of Marine and Shipbuilding Workers followed the miners' example on the East and Gulf Coasts. The Greater Akron Area Council of Labor Unions joined AFL and CIO councils representing 185,000 workers, demanded that top union leaders call a general strike in defense of labor's civil liberties. Workers at Chrysler's Courchevel plant walked out in protest, even as the nation's steel mills and auto plants began to slow from the absence of coal. Congressman Fred Hartley, co-author of the Slave Labor Bill, denounced the UMW as mutinous citizens and demanded immediate enforcement of the act against the walkout. Millions of trade unionists, white hot with anger at the repressive, union-busting legislation, were ready for job actions. But in this instance, William Green, head of the AFL, and Philip Murray, head of the CIO, were agreed in their opposition to general strike action. William Green reported that he had been flooded with appeals from AFL unions across the country calling for a general strike. He feared taking strike action would invite lawsuits and favored fighting through the courts and private contracts. Murray echoed Green and rejected any talk of a general protest strike. He invited leaders of the AFL and the Railroad Brotherhoods to join the CIO in a two-pronged fight against Taft-Hartley. Murray looked to challenge the act's constitutionality in the courts and hoped to unseat the congressman who passed it in the 1948 election. Unions are still hamstrung by many of the act's devastating provisions.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday was an interesting day in New York as, a longtime incumbent lost in a primary that I got to be honest. I think a lot of people thought he was going to go down, but not in the way that it happened. The big upset there in the New York primary, Democratic challenger Jamal Bowman ousted 30-year Democratic incumbent Elliot Engel by a 27-point margin, 62-35. Now they haven't counted all of the mail-in ballots yet, in which there are a lot, but there's no way he's overcoming that number, and it looks like that's been called. Also, the potential of another longtime congresswoman being ousted, and it's not called yet, but Carolyn Maloney appears to be in possibly some trouble. And here to share some thoughts on the races and, well, this election season, I've asked our good friend David Yankovic to come talk with us. David is one of the top national digital strategists and a good friend of the show. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Long time no talk.
Yeah, so, what do you make of Engel being ousted?
This is a different time. And I've been trying for 3 years to talk to the establishment and tell them that they need to take social media seriously, that they need to understand digital, that they need to campaign differently, and that things are changing. And I think that last election cycle in 2018 with the Crowley going down and the rise of AOC, and what she won by 74 points last night, her race as well. And then we have Engel losing in this election, and maybe perhaps Carol Maloney as well, is really kind of going to show that the world has changed a lot in a very short amount of time. And the establishment, Democrats out there, really don't seem to understand that. We saw a huge push for Booker in Kentucky in a way that I've never seen anybody have momentum before. The last couple of days of the race, everybody flocked and was endorsing him and doing it. And that was Chuck Schumer's pick there for Amy McGrath. We're seeing a lot of rejection of the candidates that are kind of being put in front of everybody and spoon-fed.
Yep.
You vote for them, and this is how we're going to do it. And New York, I think, we're going to see as like the epicenter of the new left that's happening, and it's not exactly the Bernie Sanders left either. It's not the revolution left. They're associated with it, but this is so much further than that. This is a mindset that is, again, like a political ideology that is really taking root. It's not going to stop in New York. It's not going to stop in, we're seeing it in other states as well, California, Massachusetts. This is going to be the way that the country is going. We have 4 million 17-year-olds who are going to turn 18 in this election. Which way do you think they're going to go?
No, and that's important. But here's the thing, people are mad. People are angry. People are ticked off. People are struggling to make ends meet. And, the Democratic Party really hasn't been, out on the front as much as I thought they should have been. This was a moment in my mind for Bernie Sanders to really have taken on, a whole nother life of his own. This moment was made for his policy positions, and he's been really silent. He's backed off of all of that, and basically deferred to Pelosi and Schumer, which, I got to tell you, the $500 billion slush fund to corporate America just sucks a lot of air out of me.
Yeah, and that's a really good point you're making there. Bernie, I think, is doing. I can't be easy for him in this election. First off, in the primary and what happened there, and then this is a must-win election. We can't do any kind of dividing or anything like that.
And that's what he's doing. And I get that. I get that he doesn't want to do anything to take any spotlight away from Joe Biden. I get that.
Yeah, I think that it's more, though. I think that it's not just the spotlight on Joe Biden. I think that he realizes that, his politics and the way things are going could end this election. We could have Donald Trump for 4 more years.
Right.
And to me, that's the most honorable thing that anybody could ever do. And I had to do it. When I ran in Wisconsin, you step out, you back the person up, and you win the race. You try to win the race. And if we don't win this race, it's over. The Republic's over. So I got to give Bernie a lot of credit there that, he has really kind of stepped aside and let the moment be Biden. And I'm sure on the inside, he's gently, or maybe not so gently, pushing for, reforms and things like that. He's a major member of the Democratic Party, even though he goes as an independent. A lot of our conventions and the way that even the new left, it's all going to be because of what he created and what he began with. I don't know if he'll be president, but I do know that he started an actual revolution for real. And we're seeing that in New York. We're seeing that in Kentucky. Even though McGrath's going to win, these challengers are so tired of trying to make ends meet and tired of the lack of transparency that's coming out. And I mean, there's a frustration in the country, and that's when when there's frustration in the country and when people are angry, you see Donald Trump's rise up, and you see different types of people running for offices that normally wouldn't, and that's when real change happens. We're seeing some real changes, our establishment Democrats really need to look at that. And to their credit, sometimes they do. In this one here, I don't think that they saw any of this coming, and everybody else did.
Yeah, no. Lindsey Graham tweeted out this today. He said, Joe Biden, Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer are figureheads. There is a growing radical liberal movement which will eventually cast them aside. The real power rests with AOC, the squad, and affiliated individuals/groups. He goes on to tweet, every elected Democrat in office and every Democrat running for office lives in fear of the mob and the squad. Do you agree with that? That every Democrat is running in fear of the mob and the squad?
No, not at all. I think every Democrat is living in fear that Donald Trump and his brand of political craziness is going to win in November. That's what we're running in fear of. AOC and what she's done on social media and the way that she handles the way her brand is she's terrific. It's one of the best. And the reason why she gets so much airtime and the reason why she has become so popular is solely because of that. She got elected. She has really created something, and people are following her. And the rest of the squad is the same thing. And I don't agree with a lot of stuff that they have to say. I don't agree with a lot of stuff that Democrats in general have to say half the time. But you have to respect it, and you have to understand where this is coming from. This isn't going to be a passing fad like in politics where you have, like you talk about, the Ron Paul supporters. This is something that's going to continue, and the generations behind the millennials, the Gen Zers and everybody else, they're so far left. They're much further left than the country is right now. But that's just the way the country's going. We're not going to be able to stop that, and I wouldn't want to. Progress.
Right, but there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a reason that they are so far left, and that's they've watched their parents get screwed over for decades. They've watched their family lose homes. They've watched their family lose their savings. They've watched chaos and pain and suffering, and they've seen a government that hasn't responded. And this is the manifestation of mass inequality in this country and mass suffering.
Absolutely. And don't forget that these are the kids that have to hide in a corner on their hands and knees in, shooter drills, like once a month. I mean, this is the generation has watched as, their friends and kids their age are getting murdered left and right. And we're seeing, the black community just getting the living crap beat out of them in the streets for trying to get equality. So, you're 100% right there. And this generation that's coming up behind us, they're not taking this crap. You saw the Trump rallies, and there is a lot to have there about the coronavirus and the mishandling of it and everything. But also, you have a lot of kids on TikTok that reserved tickets and did that. Like, they're a political force to be reckoned with. If we can tarnish that, and they vote, this election's over now. But you have to get them out there, so we have to register them.
But with that, you have to have something for them. And I keep saying this, that there's got to be some policies that are going to move people. Outside of the hatred of Donald Trump and his horrible policies and his really just abysmal handling of this virus, and like I said, today I don't know which side of the coin Trump is on. Are they pulling testing money? Are they not pulling testing money? I know he doesn't want to test. I mean, this is the kind of thing you should not have to question in your leader at one of the most deadly times in U.S. history. I mean, it's really quite mind-blowing.
Oh, it's terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And don't forget that they're also in court right now trying to revoke the ACA.
Right.
So in the middle of this pandemic, not only are they trying to remove the funding for testing, they're also trying to remove your health care. I think that, people are getting, $1 million, $1.6 million hospital bills for when they get done with COVID. So this is a major issue, and it's crippling families. And here's the other piece of this, too. We have, in different states right now, especially like in North Carolina and Chicago, a few others. The eviction, is going to be lifting the policy of not evicting people
Yep.
in the next week or so. How many Americans out there are going to lose everything? We're already one paycheck away from poverty. We've already, 3 months worth of paycheck we've lost. So, there's not a lot here. And Trump's out right now tweeting about lobster boats and how the lobster fishing industry in Maine is doing so well because of them. In the middle of a pandemic where people are losing their health care, where people are about to get evicted, he has no idea at all about what average people are going through at all. This is a guy who got the golden toilet. And, really, this election, you have Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, and that's going to be how it is. Can't do anything about it anyway. But Biden, for all the things everybody says, he has empathy, and he's a good human being, and he will try to do his best. And that's all we can ask for in this. The rest of it, we can push. We have, members of Congress who are running. We have people running for Senate. The future is in the hands of these generations behind us, and they get to make it. And that's what this is going to come down to. And I think that Joe Biden really does have a lot to offer there because he's going to pass that baton to the next generation.
Yeah. So last line of questioning I've got for you, because one of my big knocks against Joe Biden, who, as I've said from the beginning, was my fifth choice, is that he's old school. I mean, you talked about digital, you talked about social media. I guess he's doing a little bit better, but Trump is and the Republicans are so far ahead. How do they catch up?
You've heard me say this for years. So one of the big issues that Biden faces right now is they're trying to build a good digital army, but they don't have a good coordination for it yet. And Donald Trump, top down, bottom, the GOP, foreign nations, everything, like what Joe Biden and his campaign is about to face, I don't know if they completely see that yet. They need to have a better organizing structure. They really need to go to the grassroots online a lot more than they are. There's millions of people out there who would jump in for a second to help out and be, a digital activist for Joe Biden. They need to reach those people, and that's also how we reach the Bernie, supporters out there.
Yeah,
that,
basic organizing.
Basic organizing, and we're just, that's the old school mentality of it, and we'll see because they have made a lot of progress. The videos have gotten tremendously better. The social media, it's getting there, but the organization piece of it, that's what I keep hearing most about, is that they really need a great digital rapid response and organization structure. And once they have that, I think that, they also then have to build it. But they don't have very much time. I would say a month or two before they're too far behind, I think, to truly catch up to Donald Trump and the Leviathan digital operation of him and the Republicans and everybody else, NRA and all of it.
Can't wait much longer, David. There's only 132 days till Election Day. Cannot wait too much longer. Last question I've got for you. You talked about the Carolyn Maloney race. Any sense of how that's going to go right now? I know it's too close to call. This would be another huge upset for the incumbent Democrats. What's the word that you're hearing on the ground?
Oh man, that's going to be a toss-up. There's a lot of absentee ballots that are out still. And I don't know if, the upper Manhattan voters are going to be going to the polls or if they're going to be absentee voting from outside the district. And if that's the case, then Carol Maloney will win this thing. Now, if it holds the way that it currently is, and it's more Williamsburg and Queens that comes out, Suraj Patel has a really good opportunity to overtake her and upset her. Both campaigns, I know, have been working really hard on this, and to Suraj's credit, he's been predicting this the entire race, and he didn't lose 1% from the last election in 2018. He got 40% then, he got 40% this time. And he also had another challenger there, so it was all very impressive. I can't give you a good prediction, I'm sorry, because it's only 500 votes to separate them at the moment we're talking, and we don't know how many absentee ballots are going to turn up and who they're going to go to. So
we should know by next week, right? That's the thought?
Yeah, that's the thought.
All right. Well, we'll have you back then. You can share with us what the results were and maybe where we go forward. But, David, I appreciate the time. Keep up the great work and come back again real soon.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Take care.
As always, our good friend David Yankovic, again, one of the top digital strategists in the country. In my opinion, the guy who single-handedly put Doug Jones in the U.S. Senate. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. When we come back, we're going to talk with Carl Rosen. He is the president of the UE, United Electrical. Their union has come out and said that they're jumping on board with defunding the police and all that means. When we come back, Carl's going to share some thoughts on that. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1971. At 2:51 a.m., Battalion 12 Chief Leo Najarian of Los Angeles heard that there had been a tunnel explosion. That February, a 6.5 earthquake had killed 65 people in the area. Now it seemed tragedy had struck again. Just the night before, Chief Najarian had been called out to the same address. The Lockheed Shipbuilding and Construction Company was digging a tunnel over a mile long for the Metropolitan Water District. Chief Najarian had been called out when 4 workers were injured due to a minor explosion. He had found that the workers at the site were not testing frequently enough for methane gas. One spark from a tool could touch off an explosion. Leaving instructions to test more frequently, he left and spent the next day worried. So when another explosion alarm came from the same address, he rushed to the scene. There he found the second explosion was much worse than the first. Workers were trapped 5 miles into the tunnel. Rescue workers attempted to reach the trapped miners through a vent shaft near their position. Paul Badgley, a miner at the scene, was part of 4 rescue attempts. He described the heartbreaking effort, stating, quote, "The first time we went in there, I could hear the guys hollering for help. The third and fourth time, I couldn't hear them. It's a hell of a feeling not being able to help them when you hear them hollering." 17 workers lost their lives. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the Lockheed Company was put on trial and fined heavily for their negligence. California passed stricter mining and tunnel laws and established a state occupational safety and health administration. 19 Los Angeles firefighters were awarded the Medal of Valor for their bravery. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a Georgia grand jury handed down indictments today on felony murder and aggravated assault against the 3 guys who were charged and arrested and charged with the alleged murder of Ahmaud Arbery. It only took 4 months to do. I mean, I guess, 4 months is better than 4 years or never. But it seems kind of long from the time when it happened till now. But fortunately, they will stand trial. And look, I hope that they never see the light of day because, look, this stuff is happening way too frequently. And all of these displays are happening way too frequently. And I look at yesterday, we talked about NASCAR and the noose that was on the garage door. And the FBI's response. Well, Bubba Wallace today came out and said that, like I said yesterday, what does it matter if it was 2019 or just yesterday? It's still a freaking noose. And this is part of the conversation that we have to have as a country, that this stuff isn't acceptable, that it isn't tolerable, and that we've got to make a stand, which is why I've asked my next guest to come talk with us. He's the president of the UE, United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers Union of America. His union today came out and said, look, we're jumping on. We are going to join the call to defund the police department and whatever that means. That's why I've got Carl Rosen to come talk with us. Carl, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Good to be here again.
So walk me through this. What is, let's start with what made you jump in the middle of this. Why is this important to you and your union?
Well, all worker struggles are important to our union, and the fight for racial justice is a core part of worker struggles in this country until until we put an end to the scourge of racism and discrimination and Black workers and Black people being treated differently than everyone else. It's very hard to unite the working class and to move things forward. Not to mention, it's just plain wrong, obviously, and we should be opposing it on that basis alone. The labor movement should be standing up against all injustices, and so that's a core part. Clearly, the incidents of recent months have led to a long overdue assessment of where we're at with our criminal justice system, which is frankly for many people an injustice system. And so we're glad to have the ability to have this conversation now. We have long felt, and you can go back and look at our resolutions over many years, that we spend way too much on policing and way too little on building up the communities, giving the economic development, putting people to work, providing the social services, all of the things that need to be done, so that rather than using police to try to treat the symptoms of crime, we get rid of the root causes and have a much more productive and happier and healthier society. So this is consistent with where we've been at. We have for a long time also called for cutting the military budget in half, and instead using that money to deal with human needs, and also, we see with both the police and the military, if the main tool that a government has, as the old saying is, if the main tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So if the main tool you have is to deal with social problems, if it's foreign issues, if the main tool you have is the military, you're going to send in the troops. If the main tool you have is the police, you're going to send in the cops and tell them to be aggressive. This is no commentary on individual police. Many of them are, just coming from the working class and looking for a job, and probably went into the job thinking, I'm going to help people. But they're in an institution that exists to protect capital and protect the status quo, and that means they end up being used for bad purposes.
Now, that's something that the labor movement has, basically from the founding of the American Federation of Labor, has said from the beginning. Why is it a problem now for labor to come out and say that, maybe we should be looking at police unions?
I'm sorry, maybe we should be looking at
police unions and the power that they have.
Yeah, no, well, I think, it comes from a few places. One, obviously, the fact that we now have video. So the things that have been happening to African Americans for decades are now being seen, and the American people, including the leaders of the labor movement, are confronted by that, and it's undeniable, even though it's been happening all along. So it forces it to the front. But also, what's happened is the police unions in cahoots with public officials have either gotten laws passed or negotiated things in their contracts that no other workers are able to achieve in this country. They basically are given all kinds of protections that make it almost impossible to prosecute them for abusing people, for breaking the law, and they're protected against it in ways that no other workers can. We can negotiate lots of things in our contracts, but one of the things we can negotiate, private sector or public sector, unless you're in a police union, one of the things we can't negotiate is that if we break the law, we're not going to get prosecuted. And so I think that is now seen as a problem that comes out of police organizations and the relationships that they have with elected officials, who in many cases are all too happy to be able to have police who are unleashed as a tool. I'm from Chicago. I mean, my mayor in the 1960s said shoot to kill. Of course, he also said the police are not here to create disorder. They're here to preserve disorder. And there's a lot of truth to that too, although he didn't mean to say it that way.
One of those Freudian slips. So that brings us back to your unions coming out now and joining the call to defund the police. What does that look like in your view? Because I've had people say, well, we should just dismantle the whole institution and go to community policing, and there are a bunch of ideas out there. What are you guys calling for when you say that you're joining the call to defund police in this country?
Right. So we define it from the way we're using it as reducing the expenditures on police and moving that money over both to the things that create economic developments in the communities, but also replacement services. I mean, police are sent out for everything, mental health crisis, things where social workers are needed, all kinds of things that other trained professionals ought to be doing, but we don't have them on staff. I mean, Chicago has shut down all kinds of mental health clinics. At the same time, they've expanded what's being spent on the police.
Yeah, Pennsylvania did the same thing a number of years ago. And in fact, I brought it up on the program back then. And not only did I get a call from Governor Rendell's office, Governor Ed Rendell was governor at the time when they closed the state hospitals here. I also got a call from the local Republican mayor. So I got it from both sides. It was a Democratic and a Republican attack saying, no, you're wrong. We're not saddling the police with all this, only to find out that that's what we were doing. We were kicking people out of state hospitals and they end up getting arrested.
No, and it's. I think you're exactly right to point out it's bipartisan, because just like the military spending is bipartisan, and it's a problem. The good, obviously Democrats right now are a little more willing to take this on than Republicans, but they're careful in terms of how far they're willing to go.
Right, because here's the thing, Carl. I mean, you go back to the '90s. Bill Clinton was the guy who was saying we're putting 100,000 cops on the street,
right.
and look, the black community wanted that. It was something that they needed because crime was rampant.
That's right.
So what do you say to the people who remember that era, who say, crime was rampant, we put all these cops on the street, and it isn't as bad as it was. Now the cops are committing the crimes. What do?
We create a better society to start with, and that means we need to have real fundamental change in a lot of ways, and we need really massive investment. We need to have a policy that we're in favor of full employment. Right now, the policy of the federal government is if unemployment starts getting too low, we slow down the economy to put people out of work, because we need a certain number of people always unemployed so that we got a ready reserve of labor there to hire in cheap. And as long as that's our policy as a federal government, it makes a lot of other things hard to solve.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. In fact, something I talk about on the program quite often. I get slack for it all the time, but the reality is I'm against welfare and handout programs. I think everybody should have a job. I believe in the concept of you want to eat, you got to work. And if the private sector can't, or more likely won't, create enough jobs, that's where the public sector has to step in. But everybody should have that thing to wake up for in the morning. And at the end of the day, the therapeutic qualities of a job well done, and the self-confidence and the self-respect and esteem that they made it through the day, and that they made it through the week, and that they're taking care of themselves. I firmly believe that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But even absent that, we have greatly expanded the amount of money being spent on police. We've militarized them, which is one of the worst things we could have done. It just raises the tension totally. It's a tremendous waste of resources. I was in Chicago when there were anti-globalization protests in the early 2000s. There was a big international meeting to have here, and it wasn't long after 9/11, and so the federal government, under the guise of this is to help prevent terrorism, it sent all this military equipment out to police departments all over the country. And here we are, a couple hundred bedraggled folks just wanting to do a protest march down the street and have our little attempt to get some publicity. We get met by these phalanxes of police who were completely dressed, boot to helmet, in armor, body armor that was just until they looked like Ninja Turtles, right? I mean, they just were intended to intimidate and nothing else. And they lined the streets on both sides of us, and so we were allowed to march, but only with them alongside us, so the public couldn't see us, we couldn't see them. Just a tremendous suppression of civil liberties and civil rights, and because they had the money,
right?
Because we're pouring money in. It's a rat hole, really, and we need to cut it way back. So in the near term, are the police going to be completely eliminated? No. I mean that we'd have to get to a hugely different society than we have right now. But we could have a great reduction with conscious effort placed into other ways to keep our communities safe and stable. And that's what we're calling for. And it's, there are folks who are calling for complete abolition. From the ones I've talked to, they also recognize that isn't going to happen overnight. That's a much longer term process. There's a lot of long way to go between here and there.
Yeah, I don't ever see that happening because you're always going to have a handful of bad actors, and there's always going to be somebody. But this over policing is gotten kind of out of hand, and the other part of it is the dehumanization. I mean, you watch some of these arrests that happen, and now, as you pointed out, that everyone's got a cell phone. There's a camera all the time, and you're being confronted with it right in your face. And the thing about the George Floyd murder that really grabs people is this cop had his knee in that guy's neck for almost 9 minutes and didn't have any concern whatsoever for a human being that was underneath him. I mean, that's the bigger problem that I have.
Well, he also had no concern that this was a problem. He thought he was unaccountable. And that goes back to the nature of these laws and these contracts that protect cops from prosecution. And
yeah,
so
but even if you're unaccountable, just the mere humanity of it.
Absolutely.
I don't know. So what are you guys going to do now with this? Because, we're seeing people still in the streets, which I think is a good thing. The more that people are in the streets, the more change I think is possible. Where do you see things going?
Well, I mean, I think the protests are gonna continue. UE members are out and involved in them. UE locals have been doing things at their workplaces, including articles in their newsletters that go out to all the members in the workplace, and then they have discussions about it. We're encouraging them to take actions such as gathering people to take a knee for the 8 minutes and 46 seconds or whatever it is. But we're also going to continue to work in coalition with our allies in the social justice movement and the racial justice movements, and lift up these issues. And we're going to continue to fight for a just economy that can also help begin to make a difference for folks out there.
Ultimately, that's, for me, what it always comes back to. It comes down to that equality and fighting, the economic inequality that we see, but also the racial justice inequality that we see. And I think with societal and economic equality, the other stuff comes along as well.
And we clearly have to get things changed electorally too, and get a lot more really pro-worker candidates elected.
Yeah, before I let you go, thoughts on what happened in New York last night?
That was great. It was wonderful to see AOC really clean up, despite the fact that the establishment took a real shot at trying to knock her out. And then there's at least one more insurgent got elected, and maybe more than that. People are ready for a change, and they're realizing they don't have to settle for the same old
Yeah,
anymore. And a lot of that credit goes to Bernie Sanders and what he's managed to accomplish over the last several years. And we've loved Bernie forever. UE has always been close with him, and we just really appreciate the doors he's opened and what comes from there.
A huge Sanders fan. In fact, I tell people all the time, first interview I ever did 15 years ago was Bernie Sanders on this program. And that's because that's what I think of him. But I got to tell you, I'm a little disappointed. I haven't heard at this moment. There's part of me that goes, he should be the national voice for, we need, better health care. We need to get money into people's pockets who are struggling. I think this is the moment that's tailored for his message. And he's been fairly silent.
Well, he's been putting program out there. How much he's able to get picked up in the media now that he's not a candidate. That's the problem with ending your candidacy. And the pandemic doesn't help either, obviously, too. But I watch for later this summer as more people end up without having any health insurance, as they're losing it from job-related layoffs, and the fact that it looks like the Republicans are going to make sure that there's no health care whatsoever in whatever recovery bill comes next. I think there's going to be a big push for what Bernie has out there, the Healthcare Emergency Guarantee Act, which would basically say everybody's going to be covered. You go in the doctor's office, and so Medicare will pay every dollar. And I think that's going to become the demand, especially as the pandemic continues to spread.
We'll see how it works. Carl, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you. I hope you'll come back and talk with us again real soon.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
As always, good stuff. Carl Rosen, General President of UE, the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers Union of America. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1880. Chicago labor leader Agnes Nestor was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Her father had been a machinist and a member of the Knights of Labor. Like many other families of the era, the Nestor family moved to Chicago during the Depression that swept the country in the mid-1890s. Agnes went to work at a glove-making factory. At the factory, the women were charged for the power it took to run the sewing machines. They also had to pay for the needles they used. Agnes helped to lead a successful strike against these practices. The strike was supported by the men's union at the plant. Agnes recalled the aims of the strike, saying, "No more machine rent, no paying for needles, free machine oil, union shop, raises for the cutters who were paid the lowest wages." Agnes went on to describe the day-to-day organization of the strike, saying, "We joined the picket line again and held meetings every day and evening in the hall the cutters had rented. How important we felt. Speakers sent to our evening meetings were furnished by the Chicago Federation of Labor Organization Committee. After the strike had lasted more than a week, management sent letters to the employees offering to meet almost all of their demands. However, they refused to recognize the union. The women turned down the proposal, and after 10 days, the women won their demands, including the right for union representation. In 1902, Agnes led the women glove makers on a campaign to form their own union. She also served as the president of the Chicago Women Trade Union League for more than 40 years. Agnes Nestor spent her life fighting for women's right to vote, the 8-hour day, and child labor protections. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some good news coming out of the Pennsylvania Senate today as they passed unanimously 2 major pieces of legislation on police reform. One of them, Senate Bill 459, would mandate that all police departments maintain records of use of force. That's a huge thing. Detailing the event, the reason that deadly force was used, and any injuries, any of that stuff, property damage, death, any of that stuff, actual reports, so that you can go back and you can look at them and compile some bit of information. That has passed the Republican-led Senate. Also, Senate Bill 1205 bans the use of chokeholds in the state of Pennsylvania by policemen trying to detain individuals. Also, they would have to have a use of force policy, all police departments, and publish that policy for the public and train police to that standard. There are a number of pieces of legislation in Pennsylvania. And I had this, conversation with my daughter today who, evidently her coworkers are badgering her about these wasted protests, and they're not going to get anything, and they're not going to accomplish anything. And she asked me about it, and I said, well, there's this, and there are all of the other changes that are in the process of happening. While people are in the streets, while there's chaos going on, there are forces out there trying to quell that. And this is a moment where you don't rush out of the streets. I hope people stay, and I hope that they make things uncomfortable until we fix a lot of this stuff. Until we don't have to, every couple of months, go through this. That we fix our problems and address our problems in a way that we haven't before. And I'm hoping this is one of those moments. And I'm hoping that these elections, especially this next one, wakes people up, and we begin to move in a much better direction. And pursue that ideal of a more perfect union. where all of us have inalienable rights, where all of us can pursue our happiness, where all of us can pursue our life and liberty. I know it's a lot to ask for. I know. But I think we can. I think we can do it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
The rich are different from you and me. For one thing, they're rich. Among the super rich, though, there tends to be a peculiar sense that their net worth is a testament to their true worthiness. Thus, they seem to cling desperately to the very idea of being extremely wealthy. This leads to one specific difference between them and us. Most of us favor a wealth tax to help bridge the gaping chasm of inequality in our society. The rich do not. Indeed, we hear shrieks of abject horror and cries of doom coming from corporate boardrooms and other defenders of the plutocratic order. It would be comical if they weren't so pathetic. They exclaim that such a tax will destroy entrepreneurial motivation, sap innovation, punish success, and, get this, spur a wave of divorces. The psyches of the rich are so fragile, goes this line of bull, that a tiny tax on people with more than $50 million in wealth would keep them from getting out of bed in the morning. Jamie Dimon, a billionaire Wall Street banker, disingenuously asserts that super wealthy people like him would, quote, be happy to pay more in taxes. But he fears the government will just squander it on giveaways, quote, to interest groups and stuff like that. I have to admit that Jamie does know his stuff. After all, he weaseled billions of dollars from us taxpayers to bail out his bank during the 2007 Wall Street crash. Far from squandering revenues on such welfare cases as Dimon, those supporting the wealth tax specifically call for the money to fund universal access to higher education, free health care for all, restoration and expansion of our national infrastructure, and other direct efforts to restore the common good. This is Jim Hightower saying, to help advance passage of the wealth tax and our nation's democratic ideals, go to Citizens for Tax Justice, www.ctj.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got to tell you, as I see the coronavirus numbers going up again, and look, today was the number one day, the most new cases of the virus being reported than any day during the pandemic. And yes, I know it's but Rick, we're just testing more. If we just stopped testing, we would have no more coronavirus, which is just complete and total idiocy. But that's what's coming from our White House. Now, the scary thing for me is, school not too long down the road. My kids absolutely hated the online thing. Looking forward to going back and seeing their friends. Maybe not going to happen. I'm here to share some thoughts on what the new school year may bring us and why maybe the whole distance learning thing isn't all that it's cracked up to be. I've asked Michael Flanagan to come talk with us. He's a teacher, also a blogger, does some incredible writing. In his most recent piece, A Week in the Life of Remote Teaching by Dr. Flanagan. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I got to tell you, as I started off, I'm a little concerned that the numbers are creeping back up. Most people that I look around, they're not taking this seriously. I expect a second wave of the first wave, and I expect my kids not to go back to school in the fall.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm coming to the conclusion that it's going to be too. I teach in New York City, and we were one of the last schools to close. Our mayor and our governor fought really hard to keep the schools open. With some legitimate reasons, like, you had to feed kids, and, first responders needed a place to put their kids while they were working. But at the end of the day, you were raising the rates of people that were contracting the virus, not just teachers who may have compromised immune systems, but you had kids in an incubator-like setting of
Yep.
the schools getting sick and bringing it home to their parents. So finally, parents and teachers got together and forced the schools closed. And we jumped to remote learning, which was, we did our best, but ultimately it's crisis management, as your kids seem to feel. Like we were just kind of trying our best to have them, be educated and remain calm, during this pandemic, but it's not real teaching. So we all want to go back to school. But like you pointed out, the coronavirus numbers are jumping up again. And the question becomes, like, how do you safely open the schools when, like you said, we're expecting a second wave now? Like, how are you going to bring kids in and bring teachers back to the schools safely? That's the question. That's what we're struggling with right now.
Yeah, but I know Education Incorporated, the people who have been pushing cyber charter down our throats for the last number of years, they're just chomping at the bit at the opportunity of moving all of education to these online platforms. And look, I'm sure there are a number of school boards who would just love to get rid of all the buildings and all the teachers and go that route. But it's let me just state this from the beginning. It's a bad system, and sprucing it up ain't going to make it any better.
The cyber charter system?
Yep. The cyber charters are just a horrible system. I don't care what anybody says.
Right. And the thing that clearly came to light during this pandemic, when all parents had to see their kids switch to remote learning, is that the cyber charters are not going to work. Parents don't want their kids sitting in front of a computer screen, isolated by themselves, trying to figure out basically how to educate themselves with, no matter how good the teacher is, no matter how good the curriculum is and the technology, ultimately it's a kid by themselves in front of a screen.
Yep.
And the parents do not want that. And it just goes to show that, like, even though, like, the Bill Gateses of the world and the cyber charter industries, they want to switch to complete remote learning, the parents are not going to go for it now. It used to be just the teachers kind of fighting to preserve public schools, but now you have the parents saying, I want my kid back to school. The other side of the coin, though, is, do you want your kids rushed in to the opening of schools when it is not going to be safe? Are we opening the schools for the betterment of the children, or are we opening the schools for the betterment of the economy and the politicians who are pushing it?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. But, can't we figure out a way to do this in a way that, I think we're a smart society, at least I used to think we are, where we could, somehow figure this out with social distancing and all of this to where it wouldn't be as big of a risk. I mean, couldn't we, have much smaller class sizes? Couldn't we have staggered start times? Couldn't we do some things logistically in a better way to mitigate some of the risks?
That is what the Department of Educations across the country are trying to advocate for. But there's a few problems there. One is they don't really have a clear set policy that they can enact. Like tomorrow, I'm going on a walkthrough with my principal and a custodian and members of the Department of Education to assess spacing in my school building. My school that I teach in has about 1,600 kids, 1,500, 1,600 kids. The Department of Education for the city of New York is saying that based on the spacing of my school, you could have classrooms with 9 children and 1 teacher. That would be what they're considering safe social distancing. No cafeterias, no gyms, gym classes, and that, walking in the hall. So what that would amount to is we would need a split schedule of 1 to 2 shifts of children. Now the question is, how do you do that? How do you make 1/3 of children show up for school and the other 2/3 of the children stay home, whether it's, bi-weekly or it's, alternate days, or, as you mentioned, split schedules? There are huge issues with that. And the other side of the coin is the budget cuts that are coming as a result of the coronavirus collapse. So, teachers and parents have been advocating for smaller class sizes for decades.
Right.
And we are constantly told there is no money in the budget. They like right now in the city of New York, class sizes are 32, 33 students, depending as if it's 34 or 33 students, depending on whether it's middle school or high school. Now you want it to be one teacher and 9 kids to a classroom. You have how transportation issues, like elementary school kids take buses. Now you're looking at busing shifts. You want teachers to teach in classroom live, but then we're also going to have to be responsible for the remote learning on the other end of it. We want the kids back in school. We want to be in the physical buildings and teaching because that's the way we are built. That's what we are supposed to be doing as teachers.
Right.
But the problem is, even with the which is what they call the hybrid learning system, how are you going to enact that with the budget cuts? Like one of the things that they want to happen to reopen schools is there would be constant cleaning by the custodial staff for all commonly used materials, desks, books, laptops, tables in the cafeterias, things like that. Where is that money coming from? Where is that time? Where is that extra personnel in cleaning supplies? I mean, teachers on a regular basis have to put out GoFundMes to get markers for their classroom. Now, we're going to all have hand sanitizers. We're all going to have face masks. We're all going to have our classrooms cleaned every day. There are big issues with opening up the schools piecemeal, like these districts are trying to push.
Yeah, I mean, but as I was reading through your article, and again, I thought it was funny from a teacher's perspective what the week of remote learning looked like, because I know what my kids went through. I can't imagine having to go through this for another year. And this is where, as you're laying out all this stuff, it makes perfect sense. I mean, we obviously are not going to be able to reopen as things were before this pandemic hit. And there's so many problems with any reopening. My fear is a lot of school districts go, you know what, we're just going to stick with the remote learning, and my kids are going to lose another year of education.
I don't know if it'll be the whole year, but I do feel, because right now there is in New York anyway, and I've written other articles where I'm hearing from teachers across the country, there are no concrete plans. Some districts are like, it's going to be safe, we're going to do it. We're going to open up full classes. We're going to do hybrid learning, but we'll tell you what that'll look like. They don't really know.
Right.
And I believe their motivation is not for, kids needing social interactions, kids failing their education. They are doing it as, sort of a dog and pony show. So to say, look, the schools are back open, so let's open up all the businesses, let's get all the workers back, so the corporations can continue to make their money. You know what I mean? Like, they're not considering or they're totally disregarding the fact that the coronavirus, even in the socially distanced schools, will still be there. We're going to have the ACs on in the middle of August and September when school starts. That's going to be circulating, the air, even if we're wearing masks. So I think, late August, early September, the schools are going to say, based on the fact that, it's spiking again in Arizona, it's spiking again in Florida and Texas, they're going to say we're going to do remote learning until January. And hopefully they get a handle on the spikes, or maybe a vaccination comes through, and then we can start up the schools again in January. It's just like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. We want the kids there and we want to be there, but it has to be safe and it has to be fiscally feasible, and at this point, I don't see plans from any school district that has that underway right now.
Now, we don't have a sense of where our school district or any districts are going because, like as you pointed out, we still don't know what's going to happen in a month or two, especially as you're seeing across the South, this spiking. And in fact, your state, along with Connecticut and New Jersey today, came out and said that anyone coming from one of 9 mostly southern states is going to have to self-quarantine, and if you don't, there are going to be some pretty hefty fines associated with it.
Yeah, I mean that's good sort of like propaganda, and I do believe that that's a dig on the Trump administration and DeSantis in Florida or whatever. But like you can't really enforce that, you know what I mean? How can you enforce people coming to New York and make them quarantine? It sounds good. And I saw the press conference, and Cuomo, sounded good, and he sounded tough when he was saying that. But it's another unenforceable thing.
Yeah.
At least in New York, the majority of people in New York are walking around with their masks because we got hit so hard, so early on, that we knew the real ramifications of coronavirus. People in Florida, people in Arizona, they have been calling it a hoax. They have been doubting it. They have been organizing, reopen and don't wear your mask things, and they are paying the price now, and it will get worse. I can't see even in the biggest Trump supporting sort of sections of this country, people risking their children to force them back into schools. You can protest in a Capitol, you can walk around with a AK-47 saying open up, but like I gotta believe these people, when push comes to shove, want their kids safe and healthy. They may not care about the teachers or whatever, but like I think they're going to keep their kids home even if you do open up the schools.
Now, at least you hope, right?
Yeah.
Which means another, at least semester of a virtual bunch. In your article, I loved the Brady Bunch analogy of virtual bunch of all of the faces in the screens. And I love the fact, as you pointed out, that you threw out a couple of big words there. What was it? Synchronous and asynchronous.
Right.
Am I going to talk to an actual bunch of people who are ignoring me, or am I going to record something of people ignoring me?
And that's what it amounted to. In the beginning, like the first week when we were doing remote learning, there was a lot of kids who were showing up we were using the Zoom platform in the beginning, and I was doing daily, classes, where we would just sort of even talk about current events. I teach seniors, so I could talk more real issues going on. I teach economics and government, so like I could actually discuss the economic collapse, the coronavirus thing. And it was good. We had a regular thing. I was seeing a lot of their faces. But as it, and you call that, synchronous learning because you're teaching live. As that started to go on, I was getting more and more of the screens turning just a name. So you didn't see their face, and they were muted because you can't really talk with, 20, 30 kids or everybody on. So all I was seeing was a name in those little Brady Bunch type of screens. And what I started to do more of was the actual lessons, the content that I had to teach. I would screenshot and video myself using PowerPoint, using websites, and then I would post the material that for assessment in our classrooms. We call it Google Classroom. So I was using both forms, the asynchronous and synchronous learning, which seemed to work really well with the kids. So they could have live interaction, even though they were shutting down their screens ultimately. But like you would spot check, like you would call a kid's name to see if they were still there, things like that. But for the actual content of the learning, they could see the video, they could replay it, they could play it when they were ready, and then hand in the work in I would give a couple of days. So it got workable. It is no substitute for being in class, but it got workable. And I think a lot of teachers became very proficient in the technology and the remote learning in a quick amount of time. So if we are forced, which we may well be to stick with remote learning for the fall semester. I think we've all learned a lot that maybe it just wouldn't be so bad until we could actually get back into the building.
Yeah. Well, we will see, because I truly believe it's going to be that way for at least the fall semester anyway. And if you want to find out what it's like in the week of a remote learning teacher, check out Dr. Michael Flanagan's piece, A Week in the Life of Remote Teaching. We'll get links out on social media as well. But Mike, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Keep up the good work and stay safe.
Yes, you too, Rick. Thank you very much for supporting BATS, and have a good day.
You
have
as well. As always, good stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you looking forward to the fall? Would you send your kids back if they opened up? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day spontaneous protest strikes began against the new Taft-Hartley Act. 250,000 soft coal miners in Pennsylvania walked out of the pits. 102,000 shipyard workers of the CIO's Industrial Union of Marine and Shipbuilding Workers followed the miners' example on the East and Gulf Coasts. The Greater Akron Area Council of Labor Unions joined AFL and CIO councils representing 185,000 workers, demanded that top union leaders call a general strike in defense of labor's civil liberties. Workers at Chrysler's Courchevel plant walked out in protest, even as the nation's steel mills and auto plants began to slow from the absence of coal. Congressman Fred Hartley, co-author of the slave labor bill, denounced the UMW as mutinous citizens and demanded immediate enforcement of the act against the walkout. Millions of trade unionists, white hot with anger at the repressive, union-busting legislation, were ready for job actions. But in this instance, William Green, head of the AFL, and Philip Murray, head of the CIO, were agreed in their opposition to general strike action. William Green reported that he had been flooded with appeals from AFL unions across the country calling for a general strike. He feared taking strike action would invite lawsuits and favored fighting through the courts and private contracts. Murray echoed Green and rejected any talk of a general protest strike. He invited leaders of the AFL and the Railroad Brotherhoods to join the CIO in a two-pronged fight against Taft-Hartley. Murray looked to challenge the act's constitutionality in the courts and hoped to unseat the congressman who passed it in the 1948 election. Unions are still hamstrung by many of the act's devastating provisions.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got a number of responses yesterday on my rant about Martha McSally's American Trip Act, which, if you remember, Martha McSally and, Trump as well, and the Lobbyist Association for the restaurant folks, they want to give everybody $4,000 to go on vacation. And, I said this is, a horrible idea. I know that the restaurants and the travel, the tourism industry needs a little bit of help. I know that the workers in those industries need a lot of help. But, giving rich people more money is not the answer. Because, look, as I said from the beginning, most people don't have vacation. So good luck. And the reality is most of the people who responded were right in line with my thinking, which is great, of course. But, it's kind of long, as I said. The one person said, I don't have health care or paid sick days, let alone vacation. How about making sure I get health care? How about using that $50 billion to make my employer pay me a sick day so that if I do get sick, I don't go broke by having to take a day off, which again is kind of an interesting thought. And this is where, my problem with the Democratic Party has been. Be the party of working people, be the champion of working people. And actually, and look, Republicans can put this forth too. I know they won't, but they could say, okay, if we're going to spend the $50 billion, if we're just, throwing money into the wind, because look, we may have to. You go back to the Depression, you go back to the FDR years, they were literally throwing money out the door to get people jobs so that they could work and support their families. That is not, I'm not against the idea of paying people to do busy work. We have a lot of work that needs to be done. We've got a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. We've got a lot of investments for the future that need to be done. And look, we've got, helping our neighbors that should be done. So for me, the idea of spending $50 billion, I can think of a million better ways than giving it to the rich people who are going to go on vacation anyway. But especially during a pandemic, because as one person emailed me, what the blank giant F word are these morons thinking? Because ultimately what you're telling people is go travel to all of those areas, especially in the South, and bring back with you a little virus. So basically continuing to make things worse. For me, what I would be doing if I had the magic wand, say, look, those workers that work in those industries, they're going to be made whole. They're going to get 100% of their wage unquestioningly. 100%. They're going to be able to support their families. In fact, I would argue we should be giving them a little bit more to prop up the economy to make sure that there's some demand still there. And one person, reminded me, and I'm grateful for it, that do you remember when the Senate Democrats were talking about a proposed $25,000 hazard pay to nurses and doctors, but grocery clerks and transit workers and the essential workers, they were calling it hero pay. Remember that? Did that ever get passed through? Because it came down to all of those heroes, all those hero workers and the essential workers, they basically got screwed because they had to show up to those crappy jobs, had to deal with us. And a lot of us are morons who are not fighting over wearing a mask, putting them in danger, and they didn't even get to collect the extra money. If they had gotten laid off, they'd have gotten unemployment plus the $600 to stay home. That would have been better. So they got screwed. And I don't remember whatever happened with that hero pay. What happened with the 25 grand we were going to pay those people who showed up to work? Did that just get forgotten? Because here's what we know about those essential workers, those heroes. Yeah, we love to throw that word around until it matters, until we actually treat them like heroes. What we found out, and the Center for American Progress has a new piece out that's saying back in 2018, our essential workers, the heroes, 13.36% of them collected some form of SNAP benefits during 2018, as opposed to only 7.8 of non-essential workers. So the people who stayed home were making more money than the people who had to go to work, even back then. So the desperation of the essential worker, comes out and they're showing up to work and still struggling. Even with the companies who gave them like $1 an hour or a little bit more an hour, because they were heroes. And trust me, they're clawing it all back. But those workers didn't make out any better because guess what? It put them over the calculation to collect the SNAP benefits, so they lost their SNAP money. Again, the working class of this country getting screwed. And for me, this is one of those moments where the organizing has to, as I said yesterday, has to really jump into high gear and demand for this next round of stimulus to be focused 100% on taking care of the people at the bottom. You got through your $500 billion slush fund for corporate America, one of the largest redistributions of wealth in this country's history, not to mention the Federal Reserve buying up corporate debt like it is going literally out of style. we're going to have families who are going to be struggling. And understand, it could be you, could be me. We don't know what 6 months is going to bring. But we've got to have policies in place that's going to ensure that we don't have mass evictions and massive numbers of people being foreclosed on and thrown out in the streets out of their homes, especially during a pandemic. And we sure as damn better figure out how to make sure that people can feed their families, because you're going to continue to have those kind of reopen rallies because, you know, we got to go back to work. And look, do I disagree with it entirely? No. Because people do have to feed their kids. When the reality in this country that 40% of us can't come up with $400 in an emergency, and 60% of us can't come up with $1,000 in an emergency, to have this happen at this moment, this is what a desperation class is stuck with. Which is why, again, I keep coming back to the organizing that has to happen to push these politicians to help people like us, the working people of this country, to ensure that nobody goes broke, nobody goes hungry, nobody gets thrown out of their home. Because guess what? We're ensuring that corporate America doesn't go belly up. We're ensuring that the wealthy don't lose. We're ensuring that the Gates and the Bezos and the rest of them don't have to pay more. Maybe now's the time that we start organizing people instead of just money. Just my thought. But I'd like to thank everybody for the responses on the American Trip Act, which I'll tell you, I think is a really, really bad idea. But if you have some thoughts, I'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Bob Ney is going to be here to share some thoughts on the top news of the day. Right back.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The official reading was 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit.
Months-long Arctic heat wave delivers all-time record high in Siberia. Extreme heat now kills more Americans than hurricanes and floods. Trump administration rolls back decades-old protections for migratory birds. Plus,
we owe it to future generations to build back better, including a fairer, greener, and more resilient global economy.
UK builds world's largest liquid air battery.
Liquid air battery?
Yep.
What's that?
A liquid air battery.
All of those mysteries answered and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she doesn't even want wind. She doesn't want those bird-killing machines that go round and round. You want to see a lot of birds that are dead? Go under a windmill sometime.
You want to see a presidential campaign that's dead? Go to Tulsa sometime. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez really oppose wind power, as Donald Trump says?
No, not at all. At his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma over the weekend, President Trump repeated his delusional obsession with wind energy and false claims about high numbers of bird deaths. Just FYI, glass buildings and oil and gas fields kill far more birds than wind turbines.
Donald Trump owns a lot of glass buildings, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
And he supports a lot of oil and gas fields as well, doesn't he?
Yep. Of course, Trump omitted the part where his administration just rolled back decades-old migratory bird protections to benefit the fossil fuel industries. The new draft rules allow companies to simply claim they didn't mean to kill any birds, and that's good enough to escape fines and penalties. Plus, the Trump administration's own environmental assessment of the rollback admits that it will result in more bird deaths than under the old rules, and it suggests that there are actually benefits to having fewer birds in the world.
Other than that, he's really, really opposed to windmills because they kill all of those birds, not because they want to build it outside of his golfing properties offshore.
Right.
I gotcha.
Disturbing heat record in the Arctic Circle. The small Siberian town of Verkhoyansk hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit on Saturday, about 30 degrees hotter than the hottest temperatures for June. Once verified, it will be the all-time record high for the Arctic Circle since record-keeping began in the 1850s.
100 degrees Fahrenheit in Siberia. Did I read that in Miami it has only ever hit 100 degrees once?
Yes. Meteorologists say it's also extremely unusual because this temperature spike has persisted since December. The number and intensity of Siberian wildfires has also increased. Climate scientists say the dramatic swings in temperature in Siberia would only happen once in 100,000 years if it weren't for man-made climate change. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. That is melting permafrost on which much of the Arctic's infrastructure is built. It also releases more climate-warming carbon dioxide and methane, creating a self-reinforcing feedback loop that makes global warming even worse. And now a new study concludes that extreme heat is the biggest public health threat from extreme weather in the United States. The study from Columbia University finds that more Americans have died from extreme heat waves than hurricanes, tornadoes, or floods over the last 10 years. Scientists say that heat waves in cities across the U.S. have tripled in frequency on average over the last 20 years. And that heat waves are getting longer, including dangerous nighttime heat. And both man-made climate change and urbanization contribute to the nighttime heat trend. Florida and Arizona have seen heat-related hospitalizations and deaths double over the last decade. Researchers publishing in the Journal of the American Medical Association in a comprehensive study of 32 million births found that women who were exposed to higher temperatures or air pollution were more likely to give birth to children who were premature, underweight, or stillborn. And like with so many health-related outcomes in the United States, African American mothers and babies were harmed at disproportionately higher rates from the increases in air pollution and heat. But there is some good news, for the UK at least, where construction is underway on the world's largest liquid air battery. The massive project uses excess clean wind and solar energy to compress ordinary air into a liquid, and then, when needed, the air is released back into a gas with the pressure powering a turbine to generate clean, zero-carbon energy right back to the grid. The liquid air battery can store energy for weeks, unlike conventional chemical batteries, and will be able to power 200,000 homes for hours at a time. It's backed with funding from the UK government as part of its shift away from coal. Quite the contrast from the Trump administration.
Yes, it is. And thank you for explaining what a liquid air battery is.
Yep.
I still don't understand it, but it sounds good, so I'll take it. For much more on all of those stories and to help you figure out what a liquid air battery is, please stop by our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So my favorite little bit of news today, evidently on Friday, a judge ruled that Devin Nunes, a California representative, cannot sue Twitter over statements made by a fake internet cow, someone parroting his mother, or a Republican strategist. Evidently, Devin Nunes thinks he can sue anybody who says bad things about him. But the decision on Friday said that Twitter is immune from the defamation claims made by Nunes because of federal law that says social media companies are not liable for what we write on their platform. Yeah, I mean, that seems like common sense. We know what else seems like common sense? Maybe Nunes shouldn't try suing people over dumb stuff like this. Maybe do his job. Just a thought. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the news of the day, our good friend, former Congressman Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So we find out that you can't sue a fake internet cow.
Right. Well, by the way, members of Congress really can't sue anybody.
I know.
You know the public, official rule, basically. Right. You really have to be wronged, big time, to win any type of lawsuit if you're in the public domain.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this and I'm going, why would you do this? I mean, look, I follow Devin Nunes's cow all the time because I think it's funny that it gets under this guy's skin so much. But you can't sue it, ignore it.
Right. Yeah, because I know in the past I've met public officials that were new at the game, and they would say about, I'm going to sue. And I would say, well, you really can't. I mean, now one reverse deal that is interesting is if you are a member of Congress and you say something on the floor of the House, I don't care how outrageous it is or untrue, you can't be sued for it if you're on the floor.
Right.
But once you're off that floor, you can try suing all you want. Probably not going to work.
Yeah. Again, but it just made funny internet news. And made the Twitters happy today. So good for Devin Nunes's cow, and his mother's parody account. Today, big news: the Senate confirmed Trump's 200th judicial nominee. That scares me.
Well, one thing that was started, and I think, I know you know Don McGahn. A lot of people may not remember that name. I know you know it. Don McGahn was the legal counsel. As a matter of disclosure, Don McGahn, I always like to disclose, did legal work for myself and others for the Republican National Campaign Committee, at one time. So I know Don McGahn. But McGahn was the White House counsel. Now we all know, McGahn exited, like a lot of people, quickly as he could. Before he was terminated, he exited. And McGahn was the brainchild, Rick, behind these judicial appointments, coordinating with the Senate. He was the brainchild behind it at that point in time. So that's what set Trump into the appointment mode, and that's pretty powerful politics. At the Jefferson Jackson Day dinners and Lincoln dinners, that both parties have. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times, where they stand up and say, "Well, yeah, it's about winning our party's nominations, but it's really about judicial appointments," and they're correct. That's what it's about.
No, you go back to 2016. It's the only argument I was making for Hillary Clinton. She's better than Donald Trump, and I'm worried about the Supreme Court.
Right, and of course federal appointments all over the country. So yes, he had his 200th judicial nominee was confirmed, and by the Senate, and of course we all know what Mitch McConnell did to Barack Obama. So of that 200th, one of them was a Supreme Court nominee who really shouldn't have happened because it should have been under the Obama time.
Yeah, absolutely. But 53 appeals court judges, 143 district court judges, 2 U.S. international trade judges, and, of course, the 2 Supreme Court judges, adding up to a number of 200. And as I was looking at it, and I didn't have time to look it up, but I've got to imagine that that's probably more judges in a first term than probably any president in my lifetime.
Right, because if you look at President Obama, he had 334 judges. That was during 2 terms.
Right.
2 terms. And Bush had 340 judges during his 8 years. Clinton 387 during 2 terms. So, 200 is a lot. And if it continues at that pace, then, and if Trump's reelected, then that would be hitting probably around, 390 or 400 some appointments. And maybe, a Supreme Court or 2.
Yeah, don't say that. Don't say that. I wanted to get your thoughts on this, on the question of on a different subject. Today we find out that the administration is going to defund some of these testing sites for coronavirus. Today, the largest number of single day new claims, new cases since the pandemic began, over 36,000. Trump has said that he thinks we should stop testing so much so we don't have so many tests. On one hand, they're saying they're going to stop. I guess it's 13 of these testing sites in places like Texas, Pennsylvania, Illinois, I think New York, and somewhere else. But there's 13 of them. Then they came out and said later in the day that, well, we're not ending it. We're just doing things differently. Do you have any confidence in this administration and the testing that needs to be done?
Well, no, because the United States, he's Assistant Secretary for Health. His name is Admiral Brett Guerrier, I think is how he says it. he said in a call today that the sites were those that were left among 41 sites that the agency, that he obviously oversees, set up when the new pandemic hit this year, and that was before moving on to what he said was an antiquated program to newer testing programs. So when you're listening to what they're saying, well, we're moving on. We had antiquated testing. Now we've got newer type of testing. So when you have the newer type of testing, I guess you don't have to have as many sites is what they're saying, but that really doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense. In fact, the same guy that you're talking about, he said it's not that we're withdrawing support. We're providing federal support in a different way. And I'm not quite sure what that means.
Well, that different way is the quote, with Republicans, during the Gingrich era, it became popular to talk about private sector, turn everything over to the private sector.
Right.
So what he's talking about is that they're going to go to other sites, which would be a CVS. It would be, basic, maybe Walmart, So what they're saying is that they're going to do it with a CVS Health Core type of thing, and which could be private sector at 1,000 locations. Now, that's what they're saying.
Okay. So it's kind of like their idea with the post, when they wanted to do away with the post office and put all the post offices in Staples.
Right, and then, you'd go to the private. Now, I use CVS. They're calling them CVS Health Sections. So, who knows where they're going to put them, or who would know about it, or how you go there, or how would they do it? I don't know. I think they just probably want less tests, less numbers.
Yeah, ultimately, that's what, for me, it comes down to. Trump has said numerous times he wants less testing, and he said he wasn't kidding. So I take him, I'm going to take him at his word on.
Well, yes. Look, if this was implemented like some other countries have, and if you had widespread testing and really, went at it and had it done, it probably would not hurt them in the sense of more tests, maybe some less numbers, statistically less deaths. We've got, enough as it is, but I'm just saying statistically, they aren't capable of doing that. So if you're not capable of doing that, then you're going to have less tests, and they don't look at that as favorable, so then let's just make less tests, then you don't have to worry about it.
No, for me, and I said this from the beginning, if it's me, I want to test everybody. I want everybody tested. I want as many people to have it as possible, so I can say that the death rate is less than what it is. So then you could make the argument, hey, it's like he tried to do at the beginning. It's just like the flu.
Mm-hmm. Right. But they're not going to be capable of doing that.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
There you go. I also wanted to get your thoughts on the decision today with Michael Flynn, who, like I said at the beginning, twice pled guilty, now has done the about face, and now you've got the appeals court saying that the district judge has to throw the case out, dismiss it. Thoughts?
Right. This has been a saga that's been fascinating to watch. Well, there's been several things, the Roger Stone deal, et cetera, but, you've got a divided federal court appeal. But it's ordered the dismissal of the case against Flynn, and so this kind of, I guess at this point in time, ends the running court fight, because I don't believe the judge would be able to then go appeal as a judge above that court.
Yeah, I don't know where the next. We're looking for somebody to give us the idea of how this works, because
if it's not challenged with another appeal, then, this is it. After he sought to change his appeal, then this is it. It happens. So I'm wondering, because it was a strange thing, when Flynn happened and then the government dismissed, then in stepped the judge to say, okay, I'm going to allow other people, other entities to, pursue this. Then you've got the district that says, no, this is going to stay. So then I'm wondering, can those same entities that had the freedom to pursue this in the interest of the public, can they then challenge this court case?
No, I'm waiting to see in the next couple of days how that plays out. Because, there's part of me that goes, well, the administration has some leeway in doing this, but the guy did come forth and plead guilty twice.
Right.
And I know you have the ability to pull that back, and I get all that, but it just seems... I don't know. It seems a little unsavory.
Yeah, until the sentencing, you do have the ability to withdraw, your appeal. This was a sort of unusual case in the sense of, the government stepping in to withdraw the appeal. It's one thing if you withdraw it, you fight it, then the government decides, okay, can we really win this? It wasn't that case, whereas he just changed, and then the government said, okay, and then the judge said, wait a minute.
No.
So, I don't know legally who can appeal, but maybe the same entities in the public interest that were allowed under the judge might be allowed, in some type of appeal. We'll have to see how the legal eagles take this one.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it plays out. And finally,
Right.
I don't know if you saw today, the Department of Defense, they came out with a list of 20 companies that they claim that the Chinese military are tied in with, that do business here in the U.S. And this, I guess, is the first time that they've done this, that they've made this list public. And it's something that I guess was required in the 1999 National Defense Authorization Act. But this is the first time that this list has been made public, and it's 20 Chinese companies that are tied to the Chinese military that are doing business right here. Curious your thoughts.
Well, way back to the time I remember, in I think it was 1995 when Clinton was president, we had some issues with Chinese companies that were allowed to operate, in America. Then Bush became president, and we had some issues. I wasn't there after his presidency ended, but we've always had periodically issues about these companies, because when you look at a Chinese company, it's normally, and I know there's a hybrid China now. Yes, it's a communist dictatorship, but it's got this capitalist system. But let's face it, a lot of what is a Chinese company is Chinese government.
Right. It's a state-owned
and so you've
enterprise.
always got to watch.
Yep.
Right.
And one of the
they're
lists,
affiliated.
obviously everyone knows who the Hawaii, I guess it is.
Right.
I don't even know how you say that. Hawaii, the telecom company. How everyone's really concerned about the 5G that they're putting into place, because as it was explained to me, that next generation of internet capability, of cell phone capability, is how everything is going to talk to everything else. It's not just cell phones talking to each other. It's how cars are going to interact with each other on the road. It's how all of our systems are going to communicate. And to have the Chinese military have control of all of that is kind of a scary thing. And I get that. But also the China Railway Construction Corporation, who make rail cars and other things here in the U.S., that are just completely destroying the rest of the industry across the globe, because they're undercutting by so much. This
Right.
is the kind of mercantilist policies that are destroying industries across the world.
Right. China Railway, as you mentioned, China Telecommunications Corp, the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corp, Panda Electronics Group. Remember the group that controlled the ports? And then here's the thing about espionage today. It's not the old CIA, KGB cloak and dagger days where you've got your person in spying on people. Today's electronic spying, electronic espionage. And if they get into areas where this is a, quote, company, but it's really the Chinese government, and they have the ability to place something somewhere, they'll do it.
Yeah.
And that's always been part of the problem.
Do you think it's too far gone? I mean, I was having this conversation with someone who I consider to be, really, an expert on this, and she was saying it's not, but almost.
Almost. I would say yes, almost. There, and I don't know the technical term, but they call it dirty parts. There's the Chinese government has been able to take over the mining of this material, and it's used everywhere. Our phones, our cell phones, our computers everywhere. And in America, our own companies that did this have collapsed. So they're running that market. I mean, there's all these things. And I would agree with whoever said that. It's not completely done, but unless we do something like really quick to, bolster and secure ourselves, I think it's then way overdue.
And the reason I bring this up, and I wanted to get the last bit I wanted to get from you, is, this seems to be now where I see Trump moving his campaign strategy, because the virus is basically wiped away any economic position he's going to take. The wall is kind of a joke at this point. I fear that the scaring the hell out of us with China thing is now going to be part of their re-election strategy, and putting that up against Joe Biden at the beginning of the year, saying that China's not a problem.
Well, yes. In fact, in the last hour, right before we spoke, Trump has hit hard on Huawei, very hard, as a quote Chinese military company. The one difference, and I'll argue this forever, his Trump's promotion of "I'm going to get China, I'm going to pounce it into the ground," is what made the difference in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. I mean, that's what made the difference. No question about it, because people looked at Hillary Clinton and said, well, she kind of liked NAFTA, didn't she? She kind of likes trade deals. That's where she was soft. Bernie Sanders was strong. She was soft on it. That's the bottom line. And that's the, edge that he took. And right now, he's not running on a lot of cylinders on anything else. The economy's shot, the coronavirus. And to me, he is going to, Joe Biden is going to be China. I mean, Joe Biden is going to be living in China, as the president says. That's going to be his mainstay. It really is.
And I've been saying for months, for years, that Democrats better figure out how to get their head out of the sand on this issue and get tough on it.
Right.
But we'll see. But Bob, as always, great stuff. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Rick. Okay.
Good
Thanks.
stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you see this going the same way as I do? Because look, this is all he's got left. The China thing and the fear thing, and the fear is real here. I don't want to downplay it at all. The fear is real with China controlling so much of what we get. And it's not just the cheap trinkets that we get from Walmart. It's not just the junk that we end up buying there. It's everything else, because China doesn't just want to make the cheap manufactured goods. They want dominance. And this is where, when you start talking about this, people get, wow, it's conspiratorial. No, there's no conspiracy about it. There's no nefarious plan. They're very public about it. They're open. They're honest. They've even published it. Their 2025 plan is very detailed on how they're going to take over aviation and robotics and pharmaceuticals, how they're going after and targeting industry after industry after industry to make it their own. They're basically going to steal your lunch and make you thank them for stealing it. This is where we are. And look, I've said from the very beginning, since day one of Trump coming down the elevator, on the China issue, I'm with him. There's a problem there. Now, do I think he did anything positive? No. I think he's done a horrible job on China. I think that he gave in to them, and to a point to where they basically had him over a rock. And look, as I said at the beginning, John Bolton even said the same thing, that he did nothing on the virus front because he wanted that trade deal. He wanted the political win. We've been in this moment before. And this, again, as I said, it's almost too late. Almost. If we wait much longer and allow these Chinese companies to get even more footing and to use this crisis to buy up even more American companies. I've been doing this show now 15 years. It's going to be 15 years come Labor Day. I've been talking about this issue for every one of those 15 years. We used to have, workers come on and talk about the companies that they worked for. I still remember the one guy who worked at a factory who came on and said that he literally had to box up his machine. He had to crate up his punch press and ship it to China. He physically had to put it in a crate for them to ship overseas after he taught somebody how to use it. And they took all of that factory. They took the whole factory floor and they recreated the exact same factory in China. And instead of paying good union wages with health care and retirement and high work standards and safety, They moved it into a place where they're paying poverty wages in desperation conditions. And that was the competition. All because, well, some hedge fund made a couple of bucks. Got to do something about it, and we better do it soon. And I'm reaching out. Joe Biden, you got to be a little tougher. Love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Am I wrong? Is China a problem? I think it is. But you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of the program, thericksmithshow.com is where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.